Welcome to Know the Love of Christ. All right, welcome to Chapter 8. Last week in Chapter 7, we read and studied the gloomy proverbs. And we did discuss the spiritual and practical applications of a few of them, realizing that the dark brings out the highlights of life, I guess you could say. And we also discussed ignorance is not bliss. And then we ended with his spiral, as he usually does. So this week is chapter 8, and Stephanie's going to read the chapter, which is just 17 verses.
All right, this week I am actually reading from a different version. I'm going to read from the New American Standard, the NASB. Chapter 8. Who is like the wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a matter? A man's wisdom illumines him and causes his stern face to beam. I say, keep the commandment of the king because of the oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave him. Do not join in an evil matter, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since the word of the king is authoritative, who will say to him, what are you doing? He who keeps a royal command experiences no trouble, for a wise heart knows the proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every delight, though a man's trouble is heavy upon him. If no one knows what will happen, who can tell him when it will happen? No man has authority to restrain the wind with the wind, or authority over the day of death. And there is no discharge in the time of war, and evil will not deliver those who practice it. All this I have seen and applied my mind to every deed that has been done under the sun, wherein a man has exercised authority over another man to his hurt. So then, I have seen the wicked buried, those who used to go in and out from the holy place, and they are soon forgotten in the city where they did thus. This too is futility. Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil. Although a sinner does evil 100 times and may lengthen his life, still I know that it will be well for those who fear God, who fear him openly. But it will not be well for the evil man, and he will not lengthen his days like a shadow, because he does not fear God. There is futility which is done on the earth, that is, there are righteous men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked. On the other hand, there are evil men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I say that this too is futility. So I commended pleasure, for there is nothing good for a man under the sun, except to eat and to drink and to be merry. And this will stand by him in his toils throughout the days of his life which God has given him under the sun. When I gave my heart to know wisdom and to seek the task which has been done on the earth, even though one should never sleep day or night, and I saw every work of God, I concluded that man cannot discover the work which has been done under the sun. Even though man should seek laboriously, he will not discover. And though the wise man should say, I know, he cannot discover.
I like that version.
I know. That's why I read, for some reason, I don't know, I read different versions when I'm studying, and that one just stuck out to me. The language there is just a little different. It made it a little easier to understand, and sometimes that's that's always the benefit of reading different versions, but especially the ending there where it talked about seeking laboriously. I thought that was a good description. I felt like this chapter was different. I felt like there wasn't a whole lot of flow. I don't know.
There was flow. It was more like a whirlpool flow.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't... It wasn't linear, I guess, is what I'm thinking. Mm-hmm. Like, it kind of went all over the place.
Yeah.
But I did notice the one thing that I picked up is he asked this question, who is like the wise, which that's the ESV, or who is like the wise man, or who is wise? Mm-hmm. I think those are mostly the different renderings there. He asked this question, and then it's like, to me, the rest of the chapter, he touches on it. It's like he's trying to answer it, especially, I think, in verse 5 and verse 17 at the end. In verse 5, it says, whoever keeps the command will know no evil thing, and the wise heart will know the proper time and the just way. And then at the end, he says, even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. That's ESV there. So I think NASB said, even though the wise man should say, I know, he cannot discover. So he answers himself by the end of the chapter.
Good thing, because I couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
I couldn't make heads or tails of this chapter, to be honest with you. It's like
There-
he kept going back and forth, like
Yeah.
this and that, and it was a little hard to follow to me.
Yeah. I was, of course, verse 1 stuck out to me. The end of verse 1, a man's wisdom makes his face shine and the hardness of his face is changed. That's how the ESV says it. And that's when I was like, okay, we're definitely reading different versions like we always do, but like I'm going to dig a little deeper. With these, I'm going to do more than I usually do, and that's how I ended up over in the NASB. And it says, a man's wisdom illumines him and causes his stern face to beam. But to be honest, I really liked the way that the NET, the New English translation, rendered it. And it said, a person's wisdom brightens his appearance and softens his harsh countenance. I thought about the way that when we learn things, because that's what I feel like it's saying here. When we learn things and when we apply those things, a lot of times we'll harden ourselves against sin or we'll harden ourselves against people. But if we have the wisdom of God, it softens that. It takes the bitterness out, which is what, like a huge theme that we see throughout Ecclesiastes, is the bitterness there and the futility. And the longer you dwell on that, it's easy to get hardened by it. Like, why are we even here? What are we even doing?
Mm-hmm.
What's the purpose? Like, why bother?
It's all Hevel.
Yeah, it's all Hevel. You know, my husband, he doesn't say it bitterly, but one of the questions he likes to ask when people are making plans or trying to change things is like, to what end? TWE. So he says, and that's why I think of with this, like, to what end? Like, we're all gonna die. And we'll get to that in this chapter. We're all going to die. None of us can change it. What's the point? And the wisdom of God changes that in us. It says at the end of verse 1. I think that's what it's saying at least.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But then I think mostly the section 2 through 5 stuck out to me. It made me think of Romans 13, where it's talking about, you know, if you make an oath, basically, don't be hasty to leave the presence of the king. When you make an oath to the king, follow through. When he gives you a command, it's no good to resist it.
Do you think he's referring to himself?
I wondered that.
Me too.
I wondered about that. Of course, we talked about it being like Proverbs, which Solomon wrote. Whoever keeps the command will know no evil thing. That's verse 5. That's in the English Standard. And I thought, that's not necessarily true. There are plenty of people that it has not gone well for them because they followed the king in the Bible and otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
People that have followed a ruler that has done wicked things and they have been punished for it, or they might have been a good person and they just did something blindly, you know, and it ended poorly for them.
The New King James says, he who keeps his command will experience nothing harmful.
Right, and we know that's not really true.
Right.
They can still experience harmful. It's more of a general statement. It's more of a principle, I guess.
Like the Proverbs.
But if we think about who is the King of Kings.
Right. That was part 2 of my question.
Yeah. We know that no harm can truly come to us. I mean, on this earth, under the sun, yes, things are going to happen to us. And sometimes it happens because of our following his commandments and living his will. But true harm, I mean, nobody can touch you, you know, if God is on, what's that verse? If the Lord be for you, who can be against you?
And another one is, what can man do to me?
Yeah. And so I think of that. So, I mean, sometimes when we get into these, it's like, whoa, that's kind of a weird statement to make. But I did think about, he says to do these things. And for me, it's more of that general principle, not just the statement, but you think about Colossians 3:23 and 24, where it says, work heartily unto the Lord, not unto man. You know, my obedience to the king says more about who I am and whose I am than who I'm serving. That should be true in every relationship in my life. In Romans 13, it talks about our obedience to the civil authorities and government, and that God has given that authority. My obedience shouldn't waver because someone else isn't who they should be. My faith and my faithfulness never relies on reciprocity or it's never contingent on someone else's obedience. It hangs on God's faithfulness and my willingness to follow him. And so I think that principle is seen in this little chunk of scripture here. I don't know that that's like the immediate, but to me it's kind of a peripheral. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You made me think of Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with all that happened to him, whether it was his fault or not, most of it was not. You know, he remained faithful because he knew God was faithful.
Yeah. It makes me think of the apostles and the things that they suffered, but also...
Well, everybody, not everybody, but like Moses and Abraham and all the King David. And so, yeah.
But, I mean, of course he touches on death. That's kind of...
A recurring theme.
It's not the theme. But in verse 8, he talks about how we don't have power over the day of death. Like, even wickedness doesn't deliver you from death.
Yeah, the next little bit was basically no one's exempt. I mean, we've discussed that before in other chapters. We're all going to experience something. And he even talks about, you know, the sinner, we're going to experience things because of what we do and because of what other people do. And it's good and bad. And, you know, he saw the wicked buried and were forgotten.
Yeah, which I love how it says in the city where they had done such things, where they were praised, he saw them buried. In the city where they were praised and they had done such things.
Yeah, the NKJV says forgotten instead of praised. I noticed that too.
But that's vanity. But that principle in verse 11, I think we see that with all kinds of different things, not just, you know, criminals and that kind of activity. But I mean, like with my own kids, I see that. You know, if I don't discipline soon after an incident, it's not on their mind. And that it does. It's very easy. And that's one of the reasons that sin is so enticing, is because there is no immediate punishment. But God is long-suffering, willing that everyone should repent and have a relationship with him. And he wants to give them that option because, I mean, if the punishment was immediate, I guess none of us would get to heaven. No, I know. None of us would get to heaven.
None of us would. Right, right.
But, I mean, it would be a deterrent for sure. That principle is there. That's what he's saying, you know, because we can't execute things speedily when it's not done, when there's no justice wrought. People just keep doing things that are wrong.
Yeah, but God's grace allows for it to not be brought about speedily.
Right.
His mercy. Because then I think of, you know, people I love who are not saved.
Right.
So that puts so much more pressure on us as Christians, me as, you know, the one who knows they're not saved, to try and continue reaching out and teaching and encouraging.
But I mean, what I'm thinking of is more like the earthly consequences of things, more so than the spiritual things, that principle. You know, when people commit crimes and they aren't punished for them. We've talked about Micah 6:8 before. You know, when things happen in our lives, they enrich scripture for us. Different trials make things hit home a little harder. And for me, Micah 6:8 hits home very hard. Like loving mercy. I love mercy so much. There have just been things in my life that make me just desire mercy for everybody. You know, I look with compassion on people instead of judgment. It goes kind of into that Job principle right after this, which I think is what you were touching on. You know, that righteous people have wicked things happen to them. They get the just desserts for the wicked. Only it's not just.
Just desserts?
Yeah, that's a phrase. It is. It makes me think about Matthew 5:45, where he says, you know, it rains on the just and the unjust. And that is just a fact of life. But back then, culturally speaking, especially even in the New Testament, but we know from the story of Job that was the principle that was taught. Like, wicked people have bad things happen to them, and righteous people are blessed and their lives flourish. And that is an underlying theme of God and his law. What does it
I
say
was
there?
thinking about this recently too. Having studied the Bible, and I get that, what you're saying. It's like when bad things are happening, like I've had a dry spell lately, of things not going well, and I'm thinking, God, I'm faithful. Hello, and it's so easy to do that rather than keeping the focus on the long term and the hope we're supposed to hold on to in the afterlife. And that, I wrote a Devo this morning as like, even though that's, the wisdom, that's the wisdom we learn, like Solomon says, even if I could shut that wisdom out, that stuff I've learned, like the righteous are rewarded and the wicked, but here I am suffering, then I can hear God speak to me, and I can feel his peace that truly does just overwhelm you. And then it's like, okay.
Yeah.
So I can understand, what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think, you step outside of it, and I don't mean this in the filthy rags mentality, but none of us deserve any of the blessings God gives us.
No, we don't.
None of us can, and it is very easy to be like, I'm being faithful. Why am I not being blessed?
Why am I going through this?
I mean, I think I've mentioned it before. Or we had a miscarriage. We had multiple, but the first one we had, I took really hard, of course. And I reached out to some friends that I knew had miscarriages and said, what did you do? One of them mentioned that she kind of kept that instance of Satan walking to and fro. He comes to God and God said, have you considered my servant Job? And she said, who's to say God doesn't do that with us? Satan might be walking to and fro, and God said, have you considered my servant Dee? Have you considered my servant Stephanie? And God has allowed people to be tempted, and not that I think that I am on Job's level in any way, shape, or form, other than as a human being I have suffered, not to the extent that he has, I don't think. But even then, I shouldn't mitigate my suffering. My suffering is mine, and I have to live with it.
But what's hard for you was hard for Job.
Right.
It's the same.
Yeah. And so, I don't know, that really struck a chord with me. And I've thought about that ever since when I go through a trial. I'm wondering, is this God allowing me? And we were talking about this today earlier. You and I were about, sometimes it's really hard to pray certain prayers. And I have people in my life that I pray for, God put something in their way that'll point them toward you, even if it's a hardship. And that's a hard and painful prayer. You don't want to see people suffer. But if suffering is going to bring them closer to God, if it's going to bring them back to God, yes, please.
And I think that's the difference in temptation and a test.
Mm-hmm.
Is, of course, God doesn't tempt us. He just can't do that.
Right.
It's against his nature to tempt us. But he allows the temptations to come to us. He allows the hardships to come to us to test us.
Yeah, to bring us closer to him.
Yeah. And that's what, I was talking about my little dry spell, and I was thinking, hello, God, hello. But then sitting back, I was thinking, I'm being tested. Where's my faith? Where is, my focus? Where's my faith in him?
We were talking about that as well earlier today.
Mm-hmm.
That change is hard. Even good change is hard. It's stressful. Babies, moves, new jobs. Sometimes those are painful things, but they're good things, usually.
Yeah.
Sometimes a new job is because you lost your old one. That wasn't very fun. But I mean, just different. We're not big on change. Even the people that love change still get stressed out by change. All right, moving on. So, verse 15, ESV has a very different rendering there. It says, and I commend joy, for man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful. The rest of them, from what I could find, most of them said pleasure or something similar to that. But I looked up the word, and joy is one of the meanings there, which made me think of Philippians 4:8, But joy is something, when we've talked about that before as well, the difference between happiness and joy. And that, when we go throughout the toil of our days, that's And I do think that that's why joy is so good in this verse, the different rendering here, is that the joy of the Lord will carry us through those things. And then we wrap it up in 16 and 17, which he is always talking about applying his heart to know wisdom.
Yeah, I found that interesting too.
It was in verse 9 as well.
Yeah. Yet 17, even if the wisest man stays awake, like he never sleeps, he'll never know everything that happens. He'll never see all the things that occur, and he'll never fully understand life because man is not God. I think that's what he's saying here is you'll never be able to find out as much as you try to apply your wisdom.
His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are above our thoughts.
That was in my Devo I wrote today.
Yeah, it's a good passage. The wording there, like I said, I loved the NASB, but ESV does a good job too. I think, however much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. And that's the thing. Sometimes in our earthly wisdom, we claim to know things that we don't truly grasp. And even if we know things, there's something, experience is the teacher I can never be. Until we experience things, and death is one of those things we will not know. And death is one of the things you cannot experience and live to tell about it.
That's right.
But yeah, I loved how he wrapped it up there. Even though a man knows, even though a man claims to know,
he doesn't.
He doesn't.
Not yet.
Earthly wisdom is Hevel.
So, where do you find the love of Christ?
So I see it there at the end. I see it in a couple different places, actually. So I see it in verse 8, because we don't have power over death, but Jesus does. Jesus paid it all. Jesus was victorious over death so that we can be in the end. And we can be with him. But at the end, but when I was doing my own reading, I was thinking about Matthew 6:33, the two different passages in Matthew 6 and 7 that talk about seeking. And so, in Matthew 6, Jesus tells them, you have to seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you. And then in chapter 7, verses 7 and 8, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you shall find, knock and it will be opened. Mm-hmm. And I think about right here, it's telling us however much we toil in seeking, we cannot find it out. We cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. But there is a kind of seeking that God allows us to do. And if we seek after him, and James 1, if we seek after his wisdom, if we ask for it, because we do have to seek when we ask. I just love that God allows us to do that seeking and that it isn't futile. And so I would say that's where I see the love. And very convoluted way. So I see it in Matthew 6 and 7 and verse 17 here.
I see it in 2, 3, 4, and 5. Because to me, the king, I just can't help but to think of Jesus. So, keep the king's commandments. Do not be hasty to go from his presence. Don't stand for evil. All that. It's, I've said it before. It's a sneak peek. Mm-hmm. So all that. A wise man's heart discerns both time and judgment. He's the wisest man ever. He's the one to discern. So that's where I see it. It's different.
Yeah. Oh, I like verse 5 too.
All right. So thank you again for joining us. If you have any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. We also would like to study with you. If you have, if you're not in the area close to us, we'll be more than happy to connect you to someone that's local to you. And as always, we hope that you will seek to know the love of Christ in your life. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye. If you like this episode, be sure and share it with someone. In doing so, you're sharing the love of Christ.